It was the kind of cold that made time slow down, the kind that stripped skin raw and made the world feel like it had forgotten how to be kind. The sun hung over Brooklyn, New York, casting sharp light but giving no warmth, just a ghost of summer, now lost in a city made of concrete, steel, and frost. The streets were thinned of their usual chaos, emptied by the bitter winter bite, with only a few bodies braving the freeze, hunched shoulders, quick feet, gloved hands gripping coffee cups like lifelines. Among them moved Malik Johnson, a 16-year-old black teenager with deep brown skin and determined eyes. His body was wrapped in a threadbare hoodie that had survived 2 winters too many, its sleeves frayed and its warmth nearly gone. His jeans were stiff with cold, and his battered sneakers soaked through with sidewalk slush that seeped through the holes in their soles. He walked fast, but didn't run. There was nowhere to run to that promised warmth. School had let out hours ago, and Malik had gone straight to a yard-clearing job in Clinton Hill, raking up dead leaves and broken branches in the backyard of someone who didn't bother saying thank you. The $10 he'd earned was crumpled in his pocket, damp with sweat and stress, and he already knew it wasn't enough to matter when the rent deadline came. His mom, LaToya, worked a night shift at a diner over in Bushwick, and every day she came. Home quieter, her face thinner, her voice a little more tired. Their apartment was small, cold, and 2 months behind on heating. There had been nights Malik lay awake, curled under thin blankets, counting the cracks in the ceiling to forget how his fingers stung with chill. He didn't complain, not to his mother, not to anyone. He just kept walking, kept grinding, because there was no other choice. But that day, as he passed a shuttered flower shop in the shell of a closed-down record store, something pulled at the edge of his vision, something yellow, fluttering unnaturally in the cold. His eyes flicked left, down a narrow alley wedged between 2 apartment buildings, where the wind funneled and howled like it was mourning something. There, crumpled near a graffiti-tagged brick wall, was a figure so still, so out of place, it froze him mid-step. It was a woman, an elderly white woman, maybe in her late 70s, her frail body slumped sideways, one bare shoulder exposed where her sleeve had fallen. She wore a yellow gingham halter swing dress, like something out of a 1950s summer picnic, its bright color absurd against the grime and chill of the alley. Her skin was ghost pale, and her silver hair was tied back in a bun, now partially undone by the wind. Her eyes were shut tight, her lips a faint shade of blue, and her body trembled faintly with the last pulses of warmth clinging to her. One shoe was missing, her hands were raw and scratched, and she looked lost. No purse, no coat, no ID. Just this fragile, frozen figure slumped against the wall, like the city itself had spat her out and forgotten her. Malik stepped toward her slowly, uncertain at first. Was she drunk? High? Had someone attacked her? His heart thudded heavily in his chest, his breath puffing out in tight clouds as he crouched near her, the cold cement biting through his jeans. "Ma'am," he said softly, but she didn't stir. He leaned closer, his voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" No answer, just the sharp wind rustling her dress and the faint sound of traffic a block away. People kept walking past the alley's mouth. Some glanced in, most didn't. A few saw Malik crouched next to the woman and cross the street without a word. She wasn't moving, and she wasn't dressed for this cold. He could see it now. Her nails were manicured, chipped but well-shaped, and around her neck hung a delicate silver chain with a small locket. This woman didn't belong here. She wasn't homeless, at least not in the usual sense. She was someone who had been somewhere, someone who had meant something, but now looked like her story had been ripped from her and left to freeze on the pavement. Malik stared at her, and in that moment, something shifted deep inside him. Maybe it was because he knew what it meant to be invisible. Maybe because he knew what it meant to have no one looking out for you. Maybe it was because, despite everything, he still had a roof to go home to, a mother who'd fight the world to protect him And this woman, this white woman, had no one in this moment, no coat, no name, no memory, just the sharp wind, the cement, and a body that couldn't hold the cold anymore. Malik stood up, yanked down his zipper with trembling hands, and peeled off the only jacket he had. The wind cut into him like broken glass, but he didn't hesitate. He knelt again and gently, carefully draped the jacket over her shaking frame. She flinched slightly, murmured something incoherent under her breath, then stilled. He looked around, the sky graying overhead, the streetlights just beginning to hum to life. He couldn't leave her, not like this, not here. His breath was sharp and ragged as he muttered, "You don't know me, lady, but I'm not going to let you die out here." Malik's hands were already shaking from the cold, but the tremble deepened as he crouched closer to the old woman, her breath shallow and uneven, little wisps of it escaping her lips like fading fog. The moment his jacket touched her body, she stirred just slightly, her head lolling to the side as a soft, broken sound escaped her throat. Half a whisper, half a moan. "It's okay," Malik said quickly, gently, his voice almost apologetic, as he reached for her shoulder, trying to warm her through touch. "You're going to be okay, all right?" Her eyelids fluttered, and for a brief second, her pale blue eyes opened, glassy and unfocused, staring through him like she was seeing something far behind his shoulder, something from another time, another place. "Where?" she breathed, her voice papery and barely there. "Where am I?" Malik leaned in, trying to catch her words as the wind tore through the alley again. "You're in Brooklyn," he said carefully, not sure why he felt the need to explain gently, like she might break if he spoke too loud. "It's freezing, ma'am. You're not safe here. You need to get warm." But she didn't respond, just blinked slowly, her fingers twitching where they rested in her lap. Her dress, yellow gingham, pretty, clean, fluttered weakly around her knees, and Malik could see how exposed she was to the cold. Her bare arms were red and goose-pimpled, her knees scraped like she'd fallen hard, and the back of her head had a faint smear of blood near the hairline. Panic nudged Malik's ribs, but he forced himself to breathe. "Do you know your name?" he asked gently. She turned her head slightly, eyes locking on his face now with a flicker of clarity. But then, just as fast, it faded. I was going to..." She trailed off, confusion clouding her features, and then a look of fear crept in, like she was realizing for the first time that she had no idea where she was or how she got there. "Do you remember where you live?" Malik asked again, softer this time, crouching so they were eye level. The woman's lips parted, and she blinked again. Once, twice, and then whispered a string of numbers and a street name in a trembling voice. 85 Parkside, Westchester. The words barely made it out, like muscle memory from a life she couldn't quite grasp. Malik repeated it under his breath, locking it in his memory. Okay, Westchester. That's far," he muttered, looking around. No phone, no ID. She had nothing but the necklace, the dress, and now his hoodie wrapped around her thin body. His breath was picking up, but not from fear, just urgency. He couldn't just sit here. If he left her alone, she could slip under again. If he called 911, they might take her to some overcrowded hospital ward or worse, dismiss her as another homeless person and leave her in some underheated shelter. Not like this. Malik reached under her arm gently, apologizing as he did. "I'm sorry. I know this sucks, but I gotta get you up," he said as he helped lift her. She was lighter than he expected, too light and fragile, like lifting a bundle of dry twigs under soft cloth. She groaned faintly as she stood, her legs trembling, her head drooping onto his shoulder. "It's okay," he said again, rapping. An arm around her back, trying to ignore how his own body was now shivering violently from the lost jacket. "We're going to go get warm. I got you." Step by step, Malik led her out of the alley onto the quiet Brooklyn sidewalk, earning glances from strangers, some curious, some suspicious, but none of them stopping. He held her tighter, his own breath coming in sharp gasps now. She leaned against him with the trust of someone who had no idea who she was, where she was going, or even why she should trust him. But she did. As they reached the edge of the block, the old woman whispered again, almost inaudibly, I'm cold." Malik turned his head toward her, his voice strained but certain. "Not for long," he said. "My place isn't far. You're going to eat. You're going to rest. We'll figure it out, all right?" And though she couldn't answer, the way she leaned heavier into his side told him everything he needed to know, that she was done fighting the cold, done being lost, and for now, she was trusting the shivering boy with everything she had left. The walk to Malik's apartment felt like miles, though it was only a few blocks. Each step was slowed by the weight of the woman leaning on him, her legs threatening to give out every few feet, her breath shallow and wheezing, her skin ice-cold even beneath the thin fabric of his hoodie that now clung to her like a final barrier between life and the winter air. Malik's own hands had gone numb, his ears stung from the wind, and his lips felt cracked and dry. But he didn't stop, not once, because each time he looked down at her face, with its delicate lines etched by time and struggle, its confusion and pain so raw and exposed, he knew if he hesitated even for a moment, it could cost her life. When they reached the brownstone building tucked between a laundromat and a discount grocery store, Malik awkwardly shifted her weight to one side, fumbled for his key, and shoved open the weather-warped door to the lobby. The warmth inside hit like a soft punch, stale heat, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint scent of bleach and something fried lingering from someone's dinner upstairs. But it was heaven compared to the street. "Almost there," he breathed, mostly to himself, and half carried her up the narrow staircase. The woman was silent, except for a weak cough and a quiet whimper when her foot caught on the edge of a step. His apartment was on the third floor at the very end of the hall. By the time he reached it, his arms were aching, his breath ragged, and his body soaked in sweat and chill. He shoved the door open with his shoulder and guided her inside, a space small and dim but clean, lived in, warm with the scent of cinnamon from a candle his mother kept burning near the kitchen. "Mama's not home," he murmured, as though explaining to the woman, even though she likely couldn't process much right now. The living room doubled as the dining room and was barely big enough for the sagging couch, a small TV on a cracked stand, and the fold-out table where they ate. "Sit here," Malik said, helping her down onto the couch with slow, steady movements, keeping his hands gentle like he was setting down glass. She slumped forward slightly, eyes half-lidded, her fingers twitching in her lap like they weren't sure what to do now that they weren't fighting the cold. Malik darted to the linen closet and pulled out 2 blankets, thin but clean, wrapping them around her shoulders and arms. Then he moved to the kitchen, filled a kettle with water, and set it on the burner, his motions stiff and fast, heart still thudding in his chest. He didn't even realize how hard he was shivering until he caught a glimpse of himself in the microwave's reflection. Lips blue, cheeks red, hoodie gone, just a t-shirt clinging to his frame like damp paper. Still, he moved. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan, dropped in a heel of bread to toast on the skillet, and pulled out the last bit of honey from the cabinet. It wasn't much, but it was warm. He brought the plate to her slowly, kneeling beside the couch. "Here," he whispered. "Eat something, you need it." She blinked at the food, then at him. And for a moment, Malik thought she didn't understand. But then her hands, slow and unsteady, reached out and took the toast. "Thank you," she rasped, and Malik exhaled like someone had lifted 100 pounds off his shoulders. He gave her tea, warm and sweet, holding the cup to her lips as she sipped, her hands trembling too much to grasp it. As she ate slowly, Like each bite needed to be remembered. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, arms wrapped around himself, watching her closely. She looked around the apartment with a vacant sort of wonder, her gaze pausing on the family photo, taped to the wall. Malik, younger, smiling beside his mother outside a church in summer. "Do you know your name yet?" he asked softly, and she blinked again, confusion returning like a fog. I don't," she whispered, voice breaking, eyes filling with panic. "I was somewhere, I think. And then it's just gone." Malik reached out, placing a steadying hand over hers. "It's okay. You're safe now. I promise." And in that quiet room, lit by a single flickering lamp, the radiator knocking in the corner, snow starting to drift against the windows, something passed between them. Not words, not understanding, just the simple, unspoken truth that one life had been saved, and neither of them would ever be the same. Night had fallen fully over Brooklyn by the time Malik finished cleaning up the kitchen, stacking the empty plate and teacup in the sink, wiping down the stove and setting a fresh blanket beside the old woman, who now lay curled on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, face slack with the exhaustion of someone who had been clinging to survival far too long. The flicker of the hallway light bounced softly against the living room walls, casting long shadows that danced over the peeling wallpaper and worn furniture. Malik sat nearby, his knees pulled to his chest, staring at her as she drifted between shallow sleep and dazed wakefulness, her body still shaking now and then, a sign that the cold hadn't yet finished punishing her. He turned the heat up as far as it would go, lit another candle in the kitchen and pulled the curtain across the small window to block out the frigid wind that rattled the glass. He knew his mom would be home soon, and though he had no idea how she'd react to finding a strange white woman asleep in their living room, something told him she'd understand. LaToya Johnson was tough, but her heart beat for the broken. The woman on the couch stirred suddenly, her brow furrowing, and then her eyes snapped open, wide and wet, her breathing quickened. Where am I?" she whispered, trying to sit up, her limbs too weak to obey fully. Malik rushed to her side. "You're safe," he said quickly, kneeling beside her, placing a hand on her arm. "You're in my home. I found you outside near the alley by Fulton. You passed out and I brought you here. You were freezing. I gave you my jacket." Her eyes darted toward the hoodie still wrapped around her. She touched the fabric slowly, as if only just realizing it was there. "I don't." Her voice trembled. "I don't remember anything. I don't know who I am. I can't." Malik squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me your address earlier," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a slip of paper he'd scribbled the information on as soon as she said it. 85 Parkside, Westchester. Does that sound familiar?" The woman blinked. A flicker of something crossed her eyes. Recognition maybe, or maybe not, but it was enough. Malik stood and moved to the kitchen counter, where his mom kept the emergency phone list, the old landline plugged into the wall. He picked up the receiver and hesitated. He didn't know who to call. Cops? A hospital? He didn't trust that. He scanned the note again and suddenly had an idea. Reverse lookup. Maybe someone in Westchester knew who lived at that address. Maybe there was a number. Malik didn't have a smartphone, just a cracked, outdated flip phone, but he remembered a trick from school. He booted up the family laptop, logged onto a free Wi-Fi signal from the neighbors, and punched the address into an online directory. After a long pause and a spinning wheel, a name popped up. Eleanor Whitmore. A second later, a contact number. Malik's fingers trembled as he dialed. The phone rang, once, twice. Then a deep, composed male voice answered, "Whitmore Residence." Malik's throat tightened. "Hi. I think I found someone. An elderly woman. I think she's Eleanor Whitmore. I'm not sure, but she gave me this address." Silence on the other end, then a sharp inhale. "Where is she?" the voice asked, now tense. "Who is this?" Malik explained everything. His name, where he lived, how he found her, what she was wearing, how she collapsed. He didn't leave out a detail. The man on the other end didn't interrupt, just listened silently. When Malik finished, there was a pause and then the voice softened. "That's my mother," he said. "Oh my God, that's my mother, Eleanor. She's been missing since yesterday morning. We thought she wandered off. She has memory problems, early dementia. We've been searching everywhere. Thank you. Thank you for calling. I'll be there. I'll come to you. What's your address?" Malik gave it, stunned, and then hung up the phone slowly, his heart hammering. He looked over at the woman, Eleanor, who now lay back on the couch, her breathing steadier. A billionaire's mother, lost, cold, and forgotten by the world until a boy with nothing gave her everything he had. Malik rubbed his face, the weight of it all settling in. He didn't help her because she was rich. He didn't know. He helped because it was right. And now, just maybe, the world was about to take notice of a boy who had offered warmth without knowing he was saving a life that would change his own forever. Less than an hour later, the sound of tires crunching snow outside. The building stirred Malik from his thoughts. He stood frozen near the window, peeking through a slit in the curtain, heart pounding as a sleek black limousine rolled to a slow, silent stop in front of the building's worn stoop, an alien sight in this neighborhood, where dented sedans and rusted bicycles were more common than wealth. The long vehicle gleamed like oil under the dim streetlight. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a tailored black suit stepped out, his sharp silhouette cutting through the haze of breath and cold. Malik's stomach twisted as the man looked up at the building, then made his way swiftly up the stairs. A knock echoed through their hallway, firm, precise, confident. Malik's mom, Latoya, had arrived just minutes earlier, her eyes going wide when Malik told her the whole story. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't panicked. Instead, she'd stood, there looking at the frail woman asleep on her couch, then at her son, and simply whispered, "You did the right thing, baby." Now she stood beside Malik as he opened the door slowly. The man outside, Christopher Whitmore, son of the woman Malik had saved, looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. White, early 40s, salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, a long black coat buttoned to his throat, and eyes filled with urgency and something else. Gratitude, grief, fear, all swimming together in a storm, barely held back by his polished exterior. "I'm Christopher," he said, voice low but steady. "You're Malik?" Malik nodded silently, stepping aside. The man entered without hesitation, scanning the room until his gaze landed on the woman now bundled under Malik's blanket, her face slack with exhausted sleep. His mother, Eleanor. The change in him was immediate. All that Wall Street confidence melted as he rushed to her side, dropped to one knee, and gently touched her face. "Mom," he whispered. "Mom, it's me." Eleanor stirred faintly, her brow twitching, her lips parting. She blinked slowly, confused, and then whispered, "Christopher." It was a ghost of a voice, but the name floated out into the room like a key unlocking something sacred. Tears sprang to the corners of his eyes as he nodded, brushing her hair back gently. "Yeah, Mom, I'm here. You're safe now." Malik watched from the edge of the room, hands trembling slightly, his breath shallow, not from cold now, but from the weight of witnessing something too raw to describe. Latoya stood beside him, silent, her hand resting protectively on his back. After a long minute, Christopher turned back to them, standing slowly. "I don't have words," he said, his voice thick. "You saved her. I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't found her." He didn't finish the sentence, but the silence filled in the horror of what could have been. Malik looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "I just couldn't leave her like that," he murmured. She looked so lost. Christopher walked over, and for the first time the man who had walked in like a billionaire now looked just like a son, stripped of power, humbled by love. He extended his hand to Malik, firm and warm. "You did something most people wouldn't have. Not just helped her. You took her into your home. You gave her warmth, food, dignity. That matters more than you know." He glanced around the small apartment, the peeling paint, the cracked screen TV, the blankets folded neatly on the couch. And something shifted in his expression, a recognition, an understanding of what Malik and his mother lived with every day. "I want to help," he said finally, his voice stronger now. "Not just with my mom, with you, both of you. Let me do something." LaToya blinked, startled, cautious. "We're not looking for charity," she said gently, her tone not cold, just careful. Christopher smiled, shaking his head. "This isn't charity. This is gratitude. This is justice. People like you should be seen, should be supported. You gave what little you had to someone you didn't know. That's more than kindness. That's power." He reached into his coat, pulled out a card, and handed it to LaToya. "This is my direct line. No assistance, no runaround. I run a foundation. We partner with nonprofits, hire people with real hearts. I want to offer you a job, something steady, something meaningful. You tell me what you're good at, and I'll find the right role. I want you to be part of something that matters." LaToya stared at the card, her fingers trembling, her lips parted, but no words came. Malik looked between them, stunned, the world tilting in ways he hadn't imagined. Just a day ago, he'd been walking home cold and hungry. Now, standing in his living room, was a man who could reshape their lives, not because Malik had asked, but because he had given without expectation, given without knowing. And now, something was being returned, not out of pity, but out of respect. Eleanor stirred again, and Christopher moved to her side. Malik and his mother stepped back, giving them space, hearts pounding. In that room, filled with warm breath and soft light, a silent truth settled like snow falling gently over chaos. That one small act, made in the cold with nothing but a jacket and a good heart, had cracked the world open and let the light in. The next morning, sunlight poured weakly through the apartment's thin curtains, painting soft golden streaks across the faded linoleum and casting a glow over the quiet that had settled like a warm blanket overnight. Malik lay awake on the living room floor, curled beneath two old blankets, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. His body sore from sleeping on the ground, but his mind too alive to notice. Every time he closed his eyes, the night before replayed in his head. The black limousine, the look in Christopher's eyes the moment Eleanor had whispered her son's name, with the fragile certainty of someone climbing out of the fog. It hadn't felt real then. It didn't quite feel real now. He turned over and glanced toward the couch, where Eleanor still slept, her breathing soft and steady, her silver hair falling gently across the pillow Malik had given her, one hand resting atop the blanket wrapped around her like a cocoon. In the kitchen, his mother moved quietly, trying not to wake anyone, humming softly as she stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. The smell filled the apartment, cinnamon, nutmeg, a pinch of vanilla from the last bottle they had left, and it made the place feel less like a worn apartment and more like a home, solid and safe, if only for a moment. Malik sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, still wearing the same socks that had frozen in his shoes the night before. His mom turned when she saw him, a soft smile on her face, and walked over with a bowl in her hand. "Eat, baby," she said, pressing it into his hands like it was the most important thing in the world. "You're going to need your strength." Malik blinked up at her, eyes wide, chest full of emotions he didn't know how to name. Pride, gratitude, fear, hope. He nodded and took a slow bite, the warmth of the oatmeal spreading through his chest like a rising sun. "Do you think he meant it?" Malik asked quietly. "Christopher, about helping us." Latoya paused for a second, then sat down next to him on the floor, her back against the wall, her voice low but sure. "I think some people talk," she said, "and some people show up. And he showed up, Malik. He came to the door. He called. You by name. That means something." Malik nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward Eleanor again. It still stunned him how fragile she had looked in the alley, like the world had forgotten her, like she had slipped through the cracks of the concrete until nothing was left but breath, bone, and cold. Now she was here, alive, because he'd stopped, because he hadn't looked away. A knock came at the door again, soft and polite, not like the knock from the night before. Malik's mom stood and answered it with practiced calm. It was a delivery man, dressed in a thick brown jacket, carrying a large black garment bag and a small white envelope. "This for Malik Johnson?" he asked. Malik rose to his feet, confused, and stepped forward. "Yeah, that's me." The man smiled, handed him the items, and nodded. "You have a good day, young man." Then he was gone. Malik closed the door and stared at the envelope first. Inside was a handwritten note. "You said you gave away your only jacket. That didn't sit right with me. Hope this one helps. C.W." His hands trembling, Malik opened the garment bag and froze. Inside was a brand new winter coat, black, thick, lined with fleece, and stitched with care. It was the kind of jacket he'd never even dared to dream of owning, the kind that cost more than all the clothes in his closet combined. He slipped it on slowly, reverently, and it hugged him like armor, like the city's cold would never touch him again. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, his mother wiping a tear from her cheek as she watched him. "He didn't forget," Malik whispered. And in that moment, the weight of it all hit him. How a moment of selflessness, a single choice to act, had created a ripple now crashing back in the form of kindness. The jacket didn't just warm his body, it restored something deeper, a dignity, a value, a reminder that even someone who had nothing could be seen, respected, and honored. And as Eleanor stirred on the couch, her eyes blinking open once more, to the sound of morning and safety and hope, Malik knew the world hadn't turned upside down. It had turned toward him, finally. That afternoon, the apartment felt warmer than it ever had, not just from the creaking radiator that wheezed valiantly in the corner, but from something that couldn't be measured in degrees, a stillness filled with peace in the slow bloom of possibility. Eleanor sat upright now on the couch, a bit more lucid after a few hours of rest and nourishment, sipping weak tea from a chipped mug while wrapped in a clean blanket. Her once trembling hands were now steadier as she looked around the room, like she was trying to remember the shape of the world. Her voice, though fragile, had regained a thread of composure. And as she listened to Malik and Latoya speak, her eyes flicked from one to the other, absorbing, processing, recalling. "This isn't a shelter," she had asked softly. And Malik had almost laughed, not from humor, but from the absurdity of how close things had come to that. "No, ma'am," Latoya had replied gently, placing another pillow behind her back. "This is home." A silence followed, and then Eleanor had blinked, the corners of her lips twitching into something resembling a smile. "Then I'm very lucky," she said. Now, as sunlight faded beyond the buildings outside and cast the sky into a blue and gold haze, a knock came again. Not hesitant or heavy this time, but calm, expectant. Latoya answered the door, and Christopher Whitmore stood there again, this time dressed more casually in a dark wool coat. A scarf looped at his neck, his face not tight with panic like the night before, but thoughtful, prepared. In his hand, he held a slim folder, and over his shoulder, a tall man in his mid-50s stood patiently with a kind expression and a briefcase. Christopher stepped in, glancing at his mother with a softness in his eyes that made it clear he hadn't slept much. She looked up at him, blinking slowly. "Chris," she said again, and he nodded, moving to kneel by her side. "You look better today, Mom," he said gently, brushing a hand across hers. "You scared me." She chuckled, the sound, thin but real. "I scared myself." Malik stood quietly in the background, unsure where to put his hands, whether to sit, stand, or vanish entirely. But Christopher turned toward him, rose to his feet, and walked across the room, extending something that wasn't just politeness anymore. It was respect. "I brought someone with me," he said, gesturing to the man behind him. "This is Thomas. He's the director of a community development initiative I've funded for the past 10 years. We support youth leadership, programs, job training, educational advancement in underserved neighborhoods. We've been looking for someone real, someone with instinct, heart, someone who acts without needing a spotlight." He paused. "I told Thomas about you." Malik blinked. "Me?" he asked, pointing to his chest. "Why?" Christopher smiled. "Because what you did wasn't small. You didn't call for help and walk away. You carried my mother in your arms through the cold. You fed her, clothed her, sat beside her like family. You showed the kind of compassion this city's forgotten. How to give." He stepped closer and handed Malik the folder. "We want to invite you into something bigger. There's a mentorship program starting next month, paid after school. You'd work with kids your age and younger, kids who don't have anyone, looking out for them. You'd help design it, shape it, and if you're interested, we can support your education too. Whatever you want to study. You've proven who you are already. Now let us help you go farther." Malik's hands trembled as he took the folder, stunned, feeling the soft weight of opportunity inside. His heart thudded against his ribs, not with fear, but something far more powerful. I don't even know what to say," he murmured. "You already said it," Christopher replied, his eyes sincere. "You said it when you didn't walk past." LaToya moved to stand beside her son, one hand resting proudly on his shoulder, tears brimming in her eyes. "He was raised right," she said softly. "And he's just getting started." In that moment, surrounded by warmth, respect, and a promise that things could change, not just for a day, but for a lifetime, Malik understood. The cold world outside might still be waiting, still harsh and unrelenting, but inside this apartment, something had shifted. Doors had opened, people had seen. And his life, once shaped by scarcity and struggle, now pulsed with the unmistakable beat of something new beginning. The days that followed didn't move in the rush of miracles that movies promised. They moved in steady, quiet ripples, of a kind you only notice if you stop long enough to see how far they spread. The first ripple was when Malik sat down at the small kitchen table later that night, long after Christopher and Thomas had left, and opened the folder they had handed him. Inside was not just a brochure or some formal invitation. It was a handwritten letter, addressed to him personally, not typed, not mass-produced. It read like someone had watched him for months, seen his decisions, his struggles, his choices. "We need leaders who understand what it's like to live between survival and hope," it said. "You are that leader." There was a stipend amount listed, an amount that made his eyes widen, nearly equal to what his mom made in a week at the diner. There was also a list of school programs that Christopher's foundation was prepared to help him enroll in, from digital literacy to creative writing to college readiness. Malik stared at the pages until the words blurred, not because they were confusing, but because the idea that someone believed in him, someone outside of his own home, was overwhelming in its generosity. The second ripple came when his mother, LaToya, came home from a meeting at a community foundation office in Manhattan, where Christopher had arranged for her to interview for a position in outreach coordination. She walked into the apartment that night with her shoulders squared differently. Not heavy, not tight, but lifted, like the invisible weight she had carried for years had begun to loosen. She didn't speak right away, just stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Malik was finishing the dishes and said, "They offered me a salary, Malik. Benefits, regular hours, real work, work that matters." Then she laughed, an unsteady, almost startled sound, like she didn't believe her own words, like the very act of hope felt foreign on her tongue. Malik had crossed the room and hugged her so hard she nearly dropped her purse. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were building something. The third ripple arrived in the form of small changes, better groceries in the fridge, the radiator finally repaired after Christopher made a few calls to the landlord, a second-hand laptop sent to Malik's door with a sticky note that read, "For the future you're about to build." And through it all, Eleanor Whitmore remained part of their lives, not as a visitor, not as a burden, but as something deeper, a bond that couldn't be broken by wealth or race or circumstance. She recovered slowly, her memory returning in pieces. And when she spoke, she often asked to hear the story again, not because she had forgotten what Malik had done, but because each time she heard it, she seemed to anchor herself more fully to the truth that a stranger had saved her simply because he chose to care. Malik would sit beside her, telling her about the alley, the cold, the way she whispered her address with trembling lips. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she just smiled and reached for his hand. And one afternoon, when her memory was clearer and the sun poured through the apartment window in a soft gold wash, she turned to him and said, "You're the kind of boy the world only sees once in a while, but now that it has seen you, it won't forget." That stuck with Malik, not in a prideful way, but in a soul-deep way, the kind that plants something inside you that won't stop growing. And so, the next week, when Thomas called to ask if Malik was ready to visit the community center and meet the youth he'd soon be mentoring, Malik didn't hesitate. He put on the black coat Christopher had given him, grabbed his backpack, and walked out the door. Not just as a boy who had given away a jacket on a cold day, but as a young man now carrying something much bigger, the weight of possibility, the warmth of gratitude, and the beginning of purpose taking root in his bones. The community center stood tucked between two large brick buildings in Harlem, its entrance framed by faded murals and posters from programs past. But the moment Malik stepped through the door, the energy inside washed over him like a current, alive, chaotic, hopeful. The sound of sneakers squeaking on polished floors, the echo of laughter and shouting, the smell of baked lasagna from the kitchen wafting through the halls. It all felt like a world humming with possibility. Thomas met him just inside, clipboard in hand, and gave him a warm nod. Not the formal, rehearsed kind adults gave out of obligation, but a real one, respectful, equal, earned. "They've been asking about you," he said, gesturing toward a side room filled with a dozen kids of varying ages, all sitting in mismatched chairs, some tossing a basketball between them, others hunched over coloring pages or scrolling through cracked tablets. Malik swallowed as he stepped closer, suddenly aware of the weight of all the eyes that would soon be on him. Not because he was flashy or famous, but because word had spread. The boy who gave away his only coat. The boy who helped someone when the rest of the world didn't. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like Malik. Just a boy who had walked home one night and couldn't leave someone suffering behind. But still, the story had taken on a life of its own. And as he stood at the front of that room, Thomas gave a quick introduction. "This is Malik Johnson. He's going to be working with us in mentorship, life building, leadership development, you name it." A few kids looked up with guarded expressions, arms crossed, eyes hard. They had seen too many people come and go, too many promises made and broken. Malik recognized that look. He'd worn it once, too. So he didn't give them a speech. He sat down on the edge of a folding table, leaned forward and said, "I know what it's like to be cold and feel like nobody sees you. I know what it's like to come home to a fridge with more air than food. I know what it's like to feel like you don't matter. But I'm telling you right now, You do. You matter more than you know, and I'm not here to save anybody. I'm here to walk with you through whatever's ahead. No cap, no lies. There was a pause, a long one. And then a girl near the back, maybe 12, her hair in tight braids, her hoodie 3 sizes too big, raised her eyebrow and said, "You the coat kid, right?" Malik smiled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, that's me." A few snickers followed, then a couple of nods, and someone muttered, "That's kind of dope." And just like that, the door cracked open. Over the next 2 hours, Malik listened more than he spoke. He sat with a kid named Trey, who had been skipping school to take care of his younger siblings. He watched twins argue over whether dreams mattered more than survival. He helped a shy boy named Ellis write his first sentence of a journal entry. He didn't tell them how to fix their lives. He just showed up, real, present, consistent. And by the time the session ended, something had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but real. As the kids filed out, Thomas clapped a hand on Malik's shoulder and said, "You've got it. Whatever it is, you've got it." And Malik, walking out into the evening chill, felt something deep settle inside him. Not pride exactly, but a knowing, a purpose. He zipped up his black jacket, looked up at the Harlem skyline silhouetted in amber streetlight and whispered to himself, "This is where I'm supposed to be." Because for the first time, Malik wasn't just helping someone else find warmth. He was building a fire of his own, one bright enough to offer it to others. Weeks melted into months, and the city that once felt cold and indifferent began to change. Not in temperature, not in size, but in how it received Malik Johnson. His face, once one among thousands on Brooklyn sidewalks, became familiar at the Harlem Community Center, where kids greeted him like an older brother, not just a mentor. At school, teachers began pulling him aside to talk about scholarships, and a local journalist published an article titled, "The Boy Who Gave His Coat to Winter," which spread far beyond New York, shared across screens and hearts like a quiet anthem of human decency. But for Malik, none of it compared to the quiet moments. The way his mother, LaToya, smiled now without forcing it, her laughter returning in unguarded bursts as she came home, each day from her new job at the Whitmore Foundation's outreach department. Her dignity, no longer a thing she had to fight to preserve, but something protected by the work she did. Their apartment, once full of silent tension and unpaid bills, now held steady warmth, a stocked fridge, fresh paint on the walls, and books Malik had always wanted to read stacked near the couch. Eleanor Whitmore visited often, sometimes with Christopher, sometimes alone, wearing soft cardigans and always carrying that gentle grace she had, even when Malik first found her crumpled in that alley. She had regained most of her memory, but what never faded was her connection to Malik. She often sat with him on the fire escape, both wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, talking about everything and nothing. "You saved me before I remembered who I was," she told him once, eyes moist with something deeper than gratitude. "That means you saw something in me even I had forgotten. And I see something in you, too. A light this world doesn't deserve, but desperately needs." And Malik, now 17, just nodded. Not because he agreed fully, he never thought of himself as a light, but because he understood what it meant to be seen. The story that began with a jacket and a collapsing woman reached its quiet crescendo on a spring afternoon when Malik stood at a podium in the newly renamed Whitmore Johnson Youth Empowerment Center, addressing a room full of families, donors, and neighborhood kids. He didn't read a speech. He didn't quote anyone else. He simply spoke from that same place he always had, truth. I didn't help her because I thought it would change my life. I helped her because I couldn't live with walking away. We live in a world that teaches us to pass each other by, to think, that's not my problem. But the moment we decide that someone else's pain is our business, we start to build something better. Not perfect, but better. The room was silent, breath held, until the applause rose like a rising tide. Later, as the sun dipped behind the Harlem skyline and bathed the center in gold, Malik stood alone for a moment by the wall where a framed photo now hung. A drawing of a yellow dress, a hoodie draped over it, and the words, "Kindness changes everything." Below it, two names, Malik Johnson and Eleanor Whitmore. He smiled faintly, running a thumb across the edge of the frame, and stepped outside, the air warm with spring, the city alive again. He zipped up his black jacket, not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of where it all began. Then he walked toward the future, not waiting for it to happen, but already shaping it, one step, one soul, one act of courage at a time. Because when the world had turned away, he had chosen to stop, to care, to give, and in return, it had given him everything.